So again, it's page 91. This is the Majjhima Nikāya, the middle-length Discourses of the Buddha, Sutta number 2, the Sabbāsava Sutta, which here is translated as All the Taints. So the sutta starts off, thus have I heard. On one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. There he addressed the bhikkhus thus, Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, they replied. The Blessed One said this, Bhikkhus, I shall teach you a discourse on the restraint of all the taints. Listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, Venerable Sir, the bhikkhus replied. So I might just say a bit about this word asava, which in this rendering is translated as taint. So asava is translated many different ways. Inflow or influx, effluent, intoxicant, pollutant, fermentation. The word itself in its etymology is fairly obscure. So it has a sense of like flowing, but there's no real sense beyond that. So inflow or influx is a very literal translation, but it doesn't communicate what we're actually talking about here. So the asavas are usually divided into either 3 or 4 categories, depending on where the Buddha speaks about it. So the first asava, the most easy to relate to one, is kama asava, the asava of sensuality, the taint of sensuality. So this is the tendency to get caught up in obsession about any kind of sensual experience, from the most subtle to the most coarse. So this includes any sight, like any sight that we see that we, usually something that we like, that we want more of. It's like the sight of a person, or the sight of a painting, or the sight of a tree, or a flower, or whatever. Anything that grabs the mind, anything that entices the mind. And this is can be related to in either a positive or a negative sense, like either something pleasant that we enjoy, that we like, and then the mind seizes onto the enjoyability of that sensual experience, that delicious food, or that wonderful fragrance, or that beautiful painting, or whatever sensual experience we have that we like, that we want more of, that we want to continue with, or that we want to deepen and experience more of. Or it can also be taken in its negative sense, of things that we don't like. Because there's really, fundamentally, there's not much difference between the desire to have and the desire to get rid of. They're both simply a form of desire. So both the desire for pleasant sensual experiences and aversion towards unpleasant sensual experiences are both simply a form of desire. They're both simply a form of obsession with sensuality, which is what kamasava, the taint of sensuality, the asava of sensuality, is talking about. It's any of that underlying tendency towards obsession with sensual experience. So the optimal mentality that we would have towards sensual experiences, since sensual experiences are inevitable. We have the 6 senses. We have eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So it is inevitable that we will experience sensory contact. We will experience things through our senses. So rather than getting caught up in either our habitual reactions of wanting it or wanting to get rid of it, instead we try to dwell in equanimity. Equanimity coupled with clear awareness. So we want to be completely aware of our experiences. So this is not repression. This is not willfully ignoring. This is not just like trying to blank out or paint or disregard what's going on. Rather, it's a recognition of what we're experiencing for what it is without getting caught up in desire or aversion. So what we try to maintain is equanimity, upekkha. And this is one of the most sublime states of mind that one can hopefully bring up fairly easily towards what one experiences in everyday life. So usually one would start by developing this in a very surface layer, so we consciously bring it up when we experience a strong desire or aversion. But then beneath that, there's still the automatic habitual responses. So this can be as simple as like, you smell something nice and you just, ooh, that smells nice, you move towards it. You smell something unpleasant and you just tend to recoil a little bit. So that's beneath the conscious layer. That's working with the subconscious or the unconscious layer. And that's more where the asavas operate. So usually by the time something has like fully erupted into conscious experience, it's already almost out of control. We can still work with it. And in fact, if that's when we notice it, that's when we work with it. Basically, whenever you notice the taints arising in the mind, that's the time to work with it. It's never too late to do something about it. But as we develop some control of it on the conscious level, then we can also start to get at these layers beneath it, the subconscious and the unconscious layers from which these surface reactions arise. So this is something which takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of effort. And it usually takes a fairly developed amount of concentration. So this is one reason why the Buddha so strongly encouraged the practice of meditation, is that this is something which empowers the mind to clearly see these subconscious layers of reactive tendencies, so that we can get in there and start to uproot these automatic reactions before they get out of control. So this sutta deals with a number of techniques for working with this, mostly on the conscious layer. But again, that's where we have to start with. For most people, we have to start with where we are. And this is where we are. So I'll move on with reading a bit more of the sutta. So the Blessed One said this: Bhikkhus, I say that the destruction of the taints is for one who knows and sees, not for one who does not know and see. Who knows and sees what? Wise attention and unwise attention. There's wise attention here is yoniso manasikara. So this is like a careful attention, reflective attention, a wise attention. It's using our mind in an appropriate way. And usually we don't really have an instinctive understanding of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So this is one place where it becomes very important to read the suttas, to understand the Buddha's words. Because the Buddha mapped out a lot of these things in exquisite detail. So it's not enough just to rely on your intuition. Like some people say, oh, I don't need to read the suttas, I intuitively understand what's good and what's bad. And they don't. What they're actually doing is they're simply following their impulses. They're following their underlying tendencies. So this is simply a way that defilements erupt into the mind. Defilements can appear in the mind in the form of intuition, or what appears to be intuition. You just have a natural feeling that something is right. That doesn't necessarily mean it's right. That just means that's what you want to do on some level. So it really is important to get a sense for how did the Buddha see these things? How did the Buddha understand these things? Because that's the way an enlightened person sees the world. This is the way an enlightened person understood the mind. So this is the way that we try to see the mind. This is the way that we try to understand the mind. Because this is what brings us past suffering. This is what brings us beyond our self-destructive tendencies, which is what we spend most of our time cultivating. So this gives us a chance to start to develop helpful tendencies, beneficial tendencies. So, when one attends unwisely, unarisen taints arise and arisen taints increase. When one attends wisely, unarisen taints do not arise and arisen taints are abandoned. Bhikkhus, there are taints that should be abandoned by seeing. There are taints that should be abandoned by restraining. There are taints that should be abandoned by using. There are taints that should be abandoned by enduring. There are taints that should be abandoned by avoiding. There are taints that should be abandoned by removing. There are taints that should be abandoned by developing. So this section is basically a table of contents for the rest of the sutta, where the Buddha is dividing it up into different categories. And this itself is quite relevant in that the Buddha clearly states here that there's not a single technique that you use in every situation, but rather one needs to first observe what's going on and then apply the correct technique for that situation. So some people will say things like, all you need is mindfulness. And that's not quite true. What would be more accurate is that mindfulness is always an appropriate place to start, but it's not always enough. So mindfulness is first recognizing what's going on, but then we also then need to apply the appropriate technique, the appropriate remedy, the appropriate method for dealing with what's present in the mind. So the first section here, the Buddha continues. What taints, bhikkhus, should be abandoned by seeing? Here, bhikkhus, an untaught ordinary person who has no regard for noble ones and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, who has no regard for true men and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, does not understand what things are fit for attention and what things are unfit for attention. Since that is so, he attends to those things unfit for attention, and he does not attend to those things fit for attention. What are the things unfit for attention that he attends to? They are things such that, when he attends to them, the unarisen taint of sensual desire arises in him, and the arisen taint of sensual desire increases. The unarisen taint of being arises in him, and the arisen taint of being increases. The unarisen taint of ignorance arises in him, and the arisen taint of ignorance increases. We'll talk a bit more about this. So these are the three kinds of asava that he talks about in this particular sutta. So kama-asava, sensual desire. Bhava-asava, which here is translated as the taint of being, but bhava has a broader sense of existence. So like any state of existence. Usually the way this is most identifiable is the way we tend to identify ourselves as existing in a certain way. Like, I am a teacher, I am a cashier, I am old, I am young, I am male, I am female. The way we identify as something is identification with or attachment to a particular state of being, a particular state of existence. This is something which it also turns up in the list of the 10 fetters, the sanyojanas, the things which bind us to continued existence and suffering in samsara. This attachment to a particular state of existence, wanting to be something, wanting to be someone, wanting to be a certain way. So this is a bit more refined than the taint of sensuality. The taint of sensuality is very coarse. Like it's wanting nice things to drink, it's wanting a nice spouse, it's wanting to see a good movie. It's like, it's very, very coarse, very identifiable. But this taint of existence is a bit more subtle, because it deals with self-identification in a much more pervasive way. Like usually we don't question this basic assumption of like, I am a human being, I am this many years old, I am this gender, I am this profession. We don't question that. That's just that. Usually that's a much more subconscious tendency to think in these terms. And then the third one he lists here, the taint of ignorance. This one is even more subtle. It's even more refined. This has to deal with the pervasive delusions of the mind. This has to deal with the way that we do not perceive the world accurately. This has to do with the false beliefs we have about the way life works, the false beliefs that we run on, the false beliefs that we operate from. So these tend to be the most difficult ones to see. And again, often the best remedy for it is familiarity with the suttas. This is a way to get started. I mean, ultimately we have to develop the strength of mind, the attentiveness of mind, the clarity of mind to perceive reality clearly as it is. But in the early stages, and I'd say even through much of the practice, we have to develop an intellectual understanding first, before we can start to develop an experiential understanding. So we start by developing an intellectual understanding by reading the suttas, by developing familiarity with the Buddha's words. And that gives us the framework from which to build up an accurate perception of the way things are. And that's what starts to undermine the taint of ignorance, of vijjāsava. So,
Bhante, you said there's a fourth one also. You said 3 or 4 at the beginning.
Yes.
Is there a fourth one?
The fourth one that the Buddha mentions in other suttas, not in this one, is Dirthāsava. the asava of viewpoints, of perspectives, beliefs. So that's can be included under avijjasava, the taint of ignorance, and that the two are not quite synonymous, but they overlap. So sometimes they're just lumped into one. Like in this sutta, he just says the taint of ignorance, which includes the taint of false perspectives, false beliefs. But in other suttas, they're separated, and he speaks about them differently. So again, what the Buddha is recommending here is just to notice, like when we pay attention to certain things, like either certain thoughts or certain images or certain sounds or whatever, when we pay attention to those, are we more obsessed with sensuality? Are we more obsessed with identifying with a certain state of existence? Do we become more deluded and confused? If we do, then those are things we shouldn't pay attention to. And the flip side, if when we pay attention to something, we notice that our obsession with sensuality decreases, our obsession with identification with existence decreases, and so on, then that's something that is worth paying attention to. That's something that's beneficial. So, continuing with the sutta, so the Buddha goes on with the flip side, what things are fit for attention that he does not attend to. There are things such that when he attends to them, the unarisen taint of sensual desire does not arise, and so on. So by attending to things unfit for attention, and by not attending to things fit for attention, both unarisen taints arise in him, and arisen taints increase. So again, this is what someone who does not know the Dhamma does. This is what someone who's not familiar with the teachings and does not practice them tends to do. So paragraph 7, continuing on, the Buddha gives some examples. This is how he attends unwisely. So these are like thoughts, which the Buddha is like, these aren't really worth wasting your time with. Was I in the past? Was I not in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what? What did I become in the past? Shall I be in the future? Shall I not be in the future? What shall I be in the future? How shall I be in the future? Having been what? What shall I become in the future? Or else he is inwardly perplexed about the present in this way. Am I? Am I not? What am I? How am I? Where has this being come from? Where will it go? So these are all just forms of speculation, speculative thought, which, it's not that they're harmful, it's just that they're a total waste of time. It's completely useless. This is not something which is going to lead you to freedom from suffering. So he's like, just don't bother with these things. At best, it's a waste of time. At worst, it just gets you wrapped up in this whole obsession with me and mine. It gets you further mired into delusions and false viewpoints, false perspectives. So for the most part, we just don't need to worry about it. The important thing is like, we're here right now. This is what we're dealing with. So we pay attention to it. We observe what's going on right now with these 6 senses, with this body and mind. What is happening with this right now? And we evaluate it in terms of wholesome and unwholesome. Is what we're experiencing right now wholesome? Are there wholesome mind states? If so, that's wonderful. We rejoice in the wholesomeness of it, and we try to increase it, to improve it. If something is unwholesome in the mind, then we discard it. We let it go. We remove it. We replace it with something better. So that's much more beneficial than getting caught up with this, like, what am I going to be in the future? What am I going to be 10 years from now, or 10 lifetimes from now? Or like, what's going to happen after I die? Or what was I like in a previous life? Or these things, they're kind of cute to think about, but they're just not beneficial. It's kind of a waste of time.
Is it part of Bhavasava, or is that what you
It
said
can
a while ago?
all these can touch into all three.
All three?
But they do tend to be, I'd say, more focused on Bhavasava and Avijjasava. So either with existence, and these are closely related to existence, like what was I? How was I? What will I be? And so on. So all connected with that idea of like me existing as something or in a certain way. So I'd say Bhavasava is the most prominent feature of this kind of like inward questioning. But the other two are still present. Like thinking about nice sensual experiences you've had in the past, or like wanting nice ones in the future and so on. So sensuality can get wrapped in. And delusion, of course, underlies the whole process. Yes?
What about evaluating a thought process that you had in the past or a behavior that you had in the past to learn a lesson, for lessons learned from? It seems to me, I know you shouldn't get caught up in the past, but it seems to me like sometimes reflection on the past will yield insight.
Yes, that's true. That is beneficial. So one thing that is very important in working with the Buddhist path is to constantly evaluate the results of your actions. So yes, you can spend some time reflecting on your past actions in an attempt to develop wisdom around it, to notice like, oh, when I said all those mean things to that person, then I felt bad about it for days afterwards, or something like that. Then you can start to form a connection. You can start to see the way your actions have results and so on. So that's beneficial. But instead, if you look at it and you notice, well, actually, when I reflect on the past, I just get caught up with like reliving memories and thinking about nice experiences.
I wish I had done this, I wish I had done that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially like regret and remorse about past events tends to be completely useless. Total waste of time. So really it's about self-honesty. So being honest with yourself about the results of your choices. So yes, you can reflect on the past, and you can consider the results of your actions, what results they'll have in the future, if you find it is beneficial to the mind. If you find that it helps you develop peace, clarity, wisdom, contentment, if it helps you develop a clear understanding of wholesome and unwholesome, and if it helps you to discard the unwholesome and cultivate wholesome mind states. So you really just need to be honest with yourself about whether or not it's working. Okay? So the Buddha continues in paragraph 8. When he attends unwisely in this way, one of 6 views arises in him. The view, self exists for me, arises in him as true and established, or the view, no self exists for me, arises in him as true and established, or the view, I perceive self with self, or the view, I perceive not self with self, or the view, I perceive self with not self, or else he has some such view as this. It is this self of mine that speaks and feels and experiences here and there the result of good and bad actions. But this self of mine is permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, and it will endure as long as eternity. This speculative view, bhikkhus, is called the thicket of views, the wilderness of views, the contortion of views, the vacillation of views, the fetter of views. Fettered by the fetter of views, the untaught ordinary person is not freed from birth, aging, and death, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. He is not freed from suffering, I say. So this is where Ditthāsava, the asava of views, starts to be clearly brought into this particular sutta. So these are all wrong beliefs or false perspectives that are, unfortunately, they're incredibly common. In fact, the vast majority of people have one or more of these viewpoints. And they're all centered around this idea of a soul, of some sort of immutable essence of being. This idea that there's something that you can point to that's me. This is what I am. This. And what the Buddha comes back to over and over again in the suttas is that no matter how hard you look, you can never find such a thing. So you look through mind and body. And it's like, well, where is this soul? Where is this self? What is it? It can't possibly be the body. Like, it's not your fingernails, it's not your hair, it's not your skin, it's not your lungs, it's not your bones. Like, none of this. Clearly none of that's your soul. It's like, well, then what is it? Is it your emotions? Can't be. They're changing all the time. Is it your thought patterns? Of course not. They're changing all the time. So you can't find anything that's stable. You can't find anything that continues. You can't find anything which you can point to and say, that's my soul right there. That's that unchanging essence of being which is me. You can't find anything. Instead, what you find is simply a continually changing mass of conditions. What you find instead is cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. What you see instead is, when this happened, it caused that to happen. That's all you can see. No matter how hard you look, that's all you can see. There is nothing you can point to as being essentially me, or what I am. So one of the most basic delusions in Buddhism that the Buddha is constantly trying to get people to see past is this delusion of like, I am something. I exist in some permanent way. The Buddha's like, there's nothing of that sort. Everything is constantly changing, nothing lasts forever. There's nothing you can point to and say, that's me. And that's actually a really good thing, because this body, yeah, it can be pleasant sometimes, but it's also an unending source of irritation, confusion, disappointment, pain, hurt, loss. And even at the peak of your health, when things just seem fantastic, it's not that great. But then it just keeps getting worse from there. Until eventually, yeah, you're old and you can barely walk anymore and you can hardly breathe, and eventually you get sick and you die. And who knows what's going to happen then? Who knows what sort of body you might get next? And even our minds, we want to think a certain way, but please go ahead.
So the question, you just said, who knows what kind of body you'll get next time?
Yeah.
What's the you?
Well, what continues then is the effects of your choices.
Okay.
So again, it's like when you throw a ball up in the air, inevitably it has to fall back down. What goes up must come down. So if you perform some action in your life, and the result of that action doesn't come about while you're alive, then it will still inevitably come about. So this is what carries on from life to life. Like, there's no soul that carries on. What carries on is simply those actions which have not yet received their result. That's what carries on. It's this momentum of the choices we make. Okay?
Excuse me.
Yes, please.
And this may be way beyond the scope of this discussion, so please let me know if it is, but when I try to understand that, it just makes me wonder, I mean, is the conclusion from that if someone has a miserable life and is abused and wretched and everything goes wrong in their life, that they're somehow responsible for that in a previous life? Or?
I wouldn't put it in quite those terms, but this is that, yeah, the way it's spoken about is that, when you do bad things, then you get bad results. When you do good things, you get good results. So there is some truth to that. If somebody just seems to have constant bad fortune, they're sick all the time and their parents abuse them and they're always getting fired from their jobs or whatever, everything just seems to go wrong for them. Yeah, that might be the result of some evil choices they've made in previous lives. But that's no reason to look down on that person. Because that person might still, in this life, they might still be making an effort to develop wholesome qualities. They might still be making an effort to be a good person. They might still be trying to develop wisdom. So, yeah, there is some truth to that. What we have done in past lives determines what we experience in this life. But we always have the choice in the present moment to choose what we're going to do now. So in this way, in Western philosophy, there's this constant battle between the view of determinism and free will. Is everything predetermined, or is everything chosen? And Buddhism has elements of both. So your past actions determine your present conditions. But you have the choice in the present moment to decide what you're going to do. And that determines your future results. So it's both. The present state is effectively determined by your past actions, but right now you have the freedom to determine what sort of life you're going to live from now on.
And if you try to help this person, are you interfering with?
Of course not. That's a wonderful thing to do. It's wonderful to try to help people. That's really good for you, and it's really good for them. It's a wonderful thing.
My tendency is to believe that, so I'm just trying to understand the teachings how that understood. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
moving on with
So,
this.
Bhante, if I may add, it will also help one to eliminate those results or to reduce the effect of those results in the present form, isn't it?
Well, you can help to alleviate, like you can help to reduce the painful circumstances for that person.
Yeah.
But you can't actually eliminate the result. So every action must have its result, and every action has a complete result. So you can never stop the result of an action, but you can still alleviate the suffering a person is going through. You do have the power to help other people out. So that is something you can do, and that's enormously beneficial to yourself. Like developing those qualities of compassion and consideration and kindness within yourself. Those are very beneficial towards brightening and clarifying the mind. And also it demonstrates to that other person. It demonstrates goodness to that other person. And that can inspire other people to get themselves on the right track. That can inspire other people to develop good qualities within themselves. And it can be enormously life-changing to a person if they've constantly experienced torment and abuse and mistreatment, and someone comes along who's really nice to them. That can just totally turn things around. So it's always worth it.